Hey everybody, Jake here from Bearded Gear, and it's time for me to do my full review on the Summit Knife El Capitan. As a reminder, this knife was loaned to me, if you haven't watched my unboxing or first impressions of it, by my new friend Ed. And he has a channel here on YouTube where he has started reviewing knives as well, and I like his take on things. He's very honest about being newer to the collecting side of knives and the kind of hobby that ensues, and he's a cool dude. So I will link down to his channel in the description. Check him out if you haven't already. And Ed, I appreciate it, again, that you sent this knife to me to check out. So I have more concise thoughts now than when I did my first impressions on this knife. This knife was interesting to me. The Summit El Capitan is big, and I owned a Summit knife before. It was actually one that I won in a giveaway from Advanced Knife Bro. Well, I feel like I really get dark when I do that. Interesting. Anyways, sorry guys. I had the Summit Half Dome, and that knife is very small and was kind of a fifth pocket carry knife. I ended up giving that away in a Patreon giveaway to one of my Patreon subscribers, or Patreon patrons, I guess they're called. And I liked that knife. I enjoyed carrying it. I enjoyed having it for quite a while, and it's a good little titanium frame lock, M390 blade steel. It's cool. This feels like a whole different ball game as knife offerings go, and for them to only have 2 knife offerings at Summit Knife Co., it's a little bit interesting to me that they're so kind of polar opposite. This is a big folder. It's massive. It is a behemoth, and I'm not totally sure who this knife really fits for. One of the things that I said in my first impressions was that I find this knife kind of captivating. It grabs my attention when I've posted photos of it or when I've done other videos of it. It seems like it grabs people's attention, and it does for me. And there are things about it that I like inherently, and there are other things about it that just don't quite connect for me. So I guess I'm just gonna kind of go through the list of things that are typical for me to talk about on a knife, and we'll go from there. But first things first, the ergos of this knife, especially for its size. For me, bigger knives can be kind of a dangerous thing. A lot of big knives just don't fit my hand super well. I wear medium-sized gloves, although I fill them out real nice. I'm extra medium, but I don't have like super small hands. That being said, knives that are really big, I often find that I have like too much wiggle room, and so especially when they've got like a guard and a swell, and this handle is definitely shaped. When I first saw how big this knife was in person, I immediately was like, that's probably not going to feel that great in my hand. But it does. It feels very good in my hand. It's kind of a slim profile with kind of a tall handle. So even though it's kind of slim, it still fills the handle out, or fills the hand out well. And it's got this nice swell here, and it just feels good to me. I like this knife in hand. It feels pretty confidence inspiring. I feel pretty locked into it because of the swell here at the back and the kind of guard up at the front. It's just a good profile. Sorry, I'm going to be burping this whole time. I just ate a sizable amount of In-N-Out. Anyways, I like the ergos. It's not like my favorite knife ergonomically in the world. It's not like mind-blowingly good, but it fits my hand well, and I was a little bit surprised by that. Let's talk about how it carries. So I said in my first impressions that this knife carries a bit like a dinner plate, and I stand by that. That's obviously an exaggeration, but it is just such a big knife this way, and it's not small this way either. It's just the only dimension where it's really kind of small is the thickness. It's not like an insanely thick knife, but for its size in every other direction, it's kind of thin. At least to me, it feels relatively thin for how thick the blade stock is and for how tall the blade is and all of that. It feels kind of thin in pocket, but very fat. It's big this way, and it just feels like I've got kind of a plate in my pocket, and I don't really like carrying it. I've had it in jeans, I've had it in shorts, I've had it in like chinos, pants, but that aren't slacks but aren't jeans, kind of in between. I'm sure most of you know what chinos are. Anyways, I've had it in a number of different pairs of pants. I've carried this knife probably 7 or 8 times now total, never for an entire day, if I'm being honest. Maybe once for an entire day. I don't know. Let's go with never, just to be safe, to err on the side of caution. Every time that it's been in pocket, it's been for at least a few hours, and I've done very minimal cutting with it to just feel how it performs and all that. So I've made sure when I've carried it, it's been like a real carry, but I haven't found that in any of my typical pants that I wear that it's been a very convenient knife to carry. And I have a number of larger knives now that I find myself carrying pretty often, like the Demco 8020. I carry quite a lot. I carried that all day yesterday and didn't have any issue with it. But this, for some reason, in pocket, I feel it more than I do other knives that are sometimes even heavier or thicker, or I don't know, something about the dimensions, the way it sits in pocket. It's not horrible, it's not awfully uncomfortable, but compared to the wide array of knives that I carry frequently, it just feels a little bit cumbersome in pocket. Nothing about it is sharp, nothing about it is painful, but cumbersome, I think, is the word I'm going to go with there. The pocket clip itself does have fine retention. It's not a problematic pocket clip. I haven't really had issues with it. I do prefer deep carry clips in general, but this pocket clip is fine. I think the culprit here for me not loving carrying it is really just this dimension that way. So yeah, there's that. So that's ergos and carry. Let's talk about the cutting, and we'll do action after that. But the cutting performance on this blade is very good. I have enjoyed cutting things with this knife. It is a pretty thick blade stock, but it is obviously a very tall flat grind. This blade is very tall, and it's a full flat. So it gets not crazy thin behind the edge, but it's just a really good profile. It's not thick behind the edge, but it's not like, wow, this is a slicing dream. It's not like my SPK Shark. But as production knives go, I feel like the blade profile on this knife makes good sense for me as a cutter. And so anytime that I've cut through like continuous sheets of cardboard, stuff like that, it's been good. The one thing I will say that can be a little bit awkward with this is I do find myself cutting quite a bit of, mostly we get my daughter way too many toys. I feel like I say I'm always opening her toys, and that's because I'm always opening her toys. But like on kids' toys, the way zip ties are sometimes like really tightly around small things, it helps to have a tip that you can kind of get in there and then kind of pop the zip tie off. And with this really just tall blade and the way the belly is all the way up here to the tip, it's just not a very precise tip to get into things. But if you're cutting tape and opening packages and cutting rope and stuff like that, it's pretty good. Although sometimes when you're cutting rope, if you're cutting like a knot off of something, you don't have much room to get the tip in, and so that could be a thing here. So I think this profile does really well, specifically for like repetitive slicing through things when you're just kind of using this main path on the blade. I like cutting with it in that way, and the edge that came on it is very sharp. It's good, and it's held up very well. I haven't done a lot of cutting with this. I've been pretty deliberate about just doing a couple of cutting tasks to feel how it did, but this is a loaner, and I don't know what Ed's plans are with this knife ultimately, so I wanted to keep it in the condition that it came to me in. So yeah, I've just done very limited cutting, but I like the cutting performance. I don't love the tip. I find for me and my type of like everyday cutting tasks, the tip is very important to me, and that's part of why, frankly, I love knives like the Spyderco PM2, because that tip is precise and I can get it into things to pop zip ties or just kind of like cut rubber bands that are around things, or I can be precise with it, and this tip doesn't feel all that precise, for at least not on the same level that the PM2 is. but it's a big, tall, slicey blade. So let's talk about action, because that's one thing that I talked about before, and I was curious to see if, as I played with this knife more, if this lock bar loosened up at all or anything. But there's a couple things that contribute to an action, and usually I feel like most of what I end up talking about is kind of how the detent feels, and then how much resistance there is as the blade is traveling, whether it's on washers or bearings or what have you, I should say. And on this, the detent is fine. I don't have an issue with the detent. It's not drop shutty by any means, but it's smooth, it's not gritty, and so I don't think they were really going for like a fidgety drop shutty knife. But the real thing that I think needs to be discussed here on this knife is the strength of this lock bar. I have never owned, or frankly even handled, I don't think, another knife that had a lock bar this stiff to disengage. Now, when you look in here, the spot where you're pushing your thumb in to disengage the lock bar, it's not amazing access, to be honest. If anything, it kind of feels like on the show side, it might stick a little bit proud of where it is on the lock side, which usually you want the lock side to stick up a little more so you've got more of kind of a shelf or a ledge to press against to close the knife. So here it's like at best flush. It almost, I don't know if I'm crazy, but it almost looks like the show side scale sticks out a little bit proud of the lock side scale. So it's not very comfortable to get my thumb in there to begin with. There's not a ton of access, and it's not great grip there. This is one case where I'd say maybe a little jimping might help, and I'm not Mr. Put jimping on everything. In fact, I usually prefer no jimping, but here it's not uncommon at all for me to slip off of this, because not only is it smooth in there and it's not a very good spot to jam my thumb into, but the strength of this lock bar, it is the stiffest frame lock that I've ever felt. And I don't know, it's an aluminum frame lock, and I think they cut the, I don't know if that's called the relief or what, I'm not a knife engineer, but it seems really thick there to me compared to other knives. Like they didn't go as deep as they do oftentimes. I don't know. I've had a lot of frame locks and I've held many more than I've owned, and I've just never felt one this stiff. It's kind of a bummer to shut the knife because of that. And in addition to that, I feel like it's that lock bar tension that's really, with how smooth these washers feel, I think I'd have a better time like spidey flicking this knife open. You can see I fail on deployment a lot unless I give it a lot of wrist. And so if I've got a knife with a hole like this that feels like it's designed to be spidey flicked, I should be getting a reliable deployment at this point, in my opinion, because I'm pretty good at spidey flicking knives. I do it all day long with knives with all different sizes and shapes of holes, and on washers or on bearings, or like it's my favorite way to open a knife. My stickers say holes are greater than studs. So I don't know, I just find that it's a little bit frustrating to me that I have to like do this weird, I have to like use wrist to get this knife open, and even it's just difficult to spidey flick. And I don't know, maybe they weren't going for fidgety here. Maybe they really intentionally made the lock bar super stiff because it feels like a tighter, stronger lockup. And I will say, there's no play here. No side to side, no front to back. So that's all fine and dandy. But I've had knives that fidget real well and have no play, and don't have a lock bar this strong to get there. So I don't know. I feel like that's really my kind of hang up on this knife. If this knife had a more fun action, then I would be way more compelled by it. I don't know that I would get one still, just because of how thick it carries, and not thick this way, but thick this way. I don't really like the way it goes in pocket, if I'm being transparent here. But more than that, I don't like how strong this lock bar is, and what that does to the action, what that does to closing the knife. Like, one hand closing the knife, which for me, a primary knife, a knife like this, a big, beefy knife like this, it seems to me like it's designed for cutting tasks that oftentimes would be done maybe outdoors, or it's kind of like a working knife, right? It's big and overbuilt. I should be able to pull it out and deploy it easily with one hand, and I should also be able to close it easily with one hand. And it is a bummer for me to close with one hand. It takes a lot more focus and concentration, and it feels a lot more sketchy than a lot of the knives that I have. So, I don't know. I was compelled by this one, but I just don't think it really, like, totally passes my sniff test at the end of the day. Part of me really wanted to like it, but there's also those couple of things that just, like, they nag at me when this is the knife that I'm playing with or holding. But it looks so cool, and it's so kind of different, and a lot of the aspects of it are very nice. I like the way the blade is done and the edge is put on it, and the finishing feels good in the hand, but it's just there's the few details that kind of make it fall apart a little bit for me. So I guess that's kind of going to be that. I have had other knives manufactured by Fox that I love. So I don't think it's like a Fox Knives problem. I think it's specific to this model. In fact, I've never handled another Fox knife that had this. And I don't know if it's because it's Summit Knife who's behind it, if that was a design choice of theirs. But my half dome didn't feel that way. It was a pretty normal titanium frame lock based on how it actuated. So yeah, it's leaving me a little bit confused again. This time not so much about whether I'm going to like the knife or not, because I don't really like the knife that much as a whole. But I'm a little bit confused as to why it was taken totally this direction, because I think this design, if executed a little bit better, would be way more compelling and would be easy for me to recommend, especially for people who are into kind of big, overbuilt, beefy knives. This is a cool one because it's still relatively light, being aluminum, and it's still pretty slim compared to a lot of the other knives with a similar dimensions. So yeah, I guess that's where I end up on it. And hopefully you guys have enjoyed the journey of me getting to this place with it. But that'll be that on the Summit Knife El Capitan. And thanks again to Ed for letting me check it out and review it, and I appreciate it. So this will be on its way back to Ed now, and it's been fun while it lasted with this guy. So thanks everybody. I'll see you on the next one.